Chosen one. Oh my God. Your soulmate cut someone off after finding out this about you. Do not skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because something happened behind the scenes that you know absolutely nothing about. Something quiet, something unexpected, something that began as a simple realization, but slowly grew into a decision that changed everything. And listen to this. Your soulmate recently discovered something about you that completely shifted the way they see you. Not because someone told them a secret, not because they heard a rumor, not because they suddenly received information they never had before. What they discovered was something much deeper than that. They discovered the truth of who you really are, and your heart needs this right now because sometimes the most powerful discoveries are not hidden truths. Sometimes they are truths that have been visible all along, waiting for someone to finally recognize them. If you keep seeing 111, 444, 1111, or any number sequence that keeps finding you, drop it in the comments right now. That is not coincidence. That is confirmation. And listen to this. For a long time, your soulmate thought they understood you. They believed they had a general idea of your character, your personality, your intentions. But there is a difference between knowing about someone and truly seeing them. There is a difference between hearing words and understanding the heart behind those words. And your heart needs this right now, because that difference is exactly what changed everything. Somewhere along the way, they stopped looking at surface details and started paying attention to deeper things. The way you respond when life becomes difficult, the way you treat people when there is nothing to gain, the way your values remain steady even when circumstances change. And listen to this. What surprised them was not that you were kind. What surprised them was not that existed those qualities were. Anyone can do the right thing once. Anyone can say the right thing occasionally. Anyone can create a good impression for a short period of time. But genuine character reveals itself repeatedly. It shows up in ordinary moments. It appears when nobody is paying attention. It continues existing even when there is no reward attached to it. And your heart needs this right now because that is exactly what they started noticing. At first they dismissed it. Then they questioned it. Then they paid closer attention. And the more they paid attention, the clearer everything became. And listen to this. There may have been people around them offering opinions about you. There may have been situations that caused uncertainty. There may have been moments where they questioned what they thought they knew. But every time they looked closer, every time they observed your actions, every time they reflected on your character, they kept arriving at the same conclusion, the same understanding, the same truth. And your heart needs this right now, because truth becomes difficult to ignore when it appears repeatedly. They noticed your integrity. They noticed your authenticity. They noticed your consistency, and little by little, those observations started affecting them emotionally. And listen to this. They did not expect that part. They expected information. They expected understanding. They expected clarity. But expected feelings, because once someone discovers something genuinely rare, once someone encounters authenticity, they start noticing where authenticity is missing. Once someone sees sincerity, they become more aware of insincerity. And your heart needs this right now, because that process had already begun inside them before they even realized it was happening. The more they learned about you, the more certain things in their life started feeling different. The more they understood your values. The more they questioned the values surrounding them, the more they recognized your authenticity. The more they became aware of connections that lacked authenticity. And listen to this. None of this happened overnight. It happened gradually, quietly, through reflection, through observation, through moments that seemed insignificant individually, but became powerful when viewed together. Because your heart needs this right now. Because major realizations rarely arrive all at once. They build piece by piece, moment by moment, until one day a person suddenly understands something they can no longer ignore. And that is exactly what happened. One day they stopped questioning what they were seeing. One day they stopped looking for contradictions. One day they stopped expecting disappointment, and instead they accepted the truth. And listen to this. Accepting that truth changed everything. Not because you suddenly became a different person, not because anything dramatic happened, but because their perspective changed. The lens through which they viewed you changed. The assumptions they once carried began disappearing. And your heart needs this right now because perspective is powerful. Sometimes nothing changes externally, yet everything changes internally because someone finally sees clearly. They began realizing that what attracted them was not something superficial. It was not temporary. It was not based on appearances or circumstances. It was based on something deeper, something lasting, something real. And listen to this. As that realization continued growing, it became impossible for them to separate it from the rest of their life. Every new understanding about you created new questions about everything else around them. Every discovery about your character caused them to examine their existing connections more carefully. And your heart needs this right now because awareness spreads. Once someone becomes aware in one area of life, that awareness begins influencing every other area. Suddenly they were evaluating things differently, thinking differently, feeling differently, questioning things they once accepted without hesitation. And listen to this. They may not have understood where this journey was leading. They may have believed they were simply learning more about you. But in reality, they were moving toward a realization much larger than they imagined. A realization that would eventually affect major decisions, major emotions, major changes, because your heart needs this right now. Because the truth they discovered about you was never just about you. It was about what you represented: authenticity, honesty, consistency, integrity. The qualities they had been searching for without fully realizing it. And once they found those qualities reflected in you, they could no longer pretend those qualities did not matter. They could no longer ignore the difference between what felt genuine and what felt artificial. They could no longer settle for things that no longer aligned with their deeper values. And listen to this. That is where the story truly begins. Not with the person they eventually cut off, not with the decision they eventually made, but with this moment, this realization, this discovery. The moment they finally saw something about you that changed everything. Because sometimes one truth is powerful enough to challenge years of assumptions. Sometimes one genuine person is powerful enough to change the way someone sees the world. And sometimes a single realization quietly begins a chain of events that transforms everything that follows. Sometimes the most powerful things that happen to us begin with someone choosing to believe in something before they can see it. If this message is one of those moments for you, there is something you can do through the link in the pinned comment and in the description. Whether it is a coffee, a seed, or becoming a part of this community, what you give here is not charity. It is an act of agreement with what is already in motion. Every seed sown in a moment of genuine recognition comes back, not always in the way you expect, but always in the season you need it most. You are not giving to a channel. You are giving to the version of yourself that is finally beginning to believe they deserve what is real. And your soulmate had just experienced exactly that. Type "I claim this" in the comments if this message found you at exactly the right moment. Do not skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after your soulmate discovered the truth about you, something inside them refused to go back to the way it was before. Hit subscribe right now, because what is unfolding in this message is only the beginning, and you do not want to miss what comes next. And listen to this. At first, they tried to treat the realization as something small, something temporary, something they would eventually stop thinking about. They told themselves they were reading too much into it. They told themselves they were overanalyzing. They told themselves that what they discovered about you was not important enough to change anything. But no matter how hard they tried to push it aside, the truth kept returning. It followed them into quiet moments. It appeared during conversations. It resurfaced when they were alone with their thoughts. And your heart needs this right now, because some truths do not disappear once they are seen. Some truths become stronger every time a person tries to ignore them. And listen to this. The more they reflected on what they discovered, the more they realized it was not just one thing that affected them. It was not one conversation. It was not one action. It was not one specific moment. It was a pattern. A pattern that kept repeating itself every time they thought about you. The way you handled challenges, the way you remained consistent under pressure, the way your actions reflected your values, the way you stayed true to yourself even when nobody was watching. And your heart needs this right now, because consistency is one of the hardest qualities to fake. Anyone can create an image. Anyone can perform kindness for a short period of time. Anyone can say the right words when they know people are paying attention. But authenticity reveals itself over time. It survives difficult moments. It survives uncertainty. It survives situations where there is nothing to gain. And listen to this. The more they realize that about you, the more emotional the discovery became, because for a long time they had become accustomed to seeing something different in the world around them. They had become accustomed to inconsistency, to mixed messages, to people saying one thing and doing another, to connections that looked strong on the surface but felt empty underneath. And your heart needs this right now, because when someone becomes used to disappointment, genuine sincerity feels almost shocking. It feels unusual. It feels rare. It feels like discovering something they thought no longer existed. And listen to this. They started remembering conversations they once dismissed, small moments they once overlooked, details they once considered insignificant. And suddenly those moments seemed different. Suddenly they carried meaning. Suddenly they fit together like pieces of a puzzle they had been trying to solve without realizing it. And your heart needs this right now, because the picture that was forming became impossible to ignore. The more pieces they connected, the clearer the truth became. The clearer the truth became, the stronger their feelings grew. They began seeing you differently. Not because you changed, because they changed, because they finally saw what had been there all along. And listen to this, that realization created an emotional shift they never expected. The doubts they once carried began losing their power. The fears they once relied on began feeling less convincing. The assumptions they once used to protect themselves started falling apart. And your heart needs this right now, because people often believe they are protecting themselves when they hold on to doubt. But sometimes doubt becomes a wall that prevents them from seeing what is real. And little by little those walls were beginning to crack. At first it was subtle, then it became noticeable. Then it became impossible to ignore. And listen to this. Every time they reflected on your authenticity, they found themselves comparing it to other areas of their life. Not because they wanted to, not because they were searching for problems, but because awareness naturally spreads. Once someone experiences clarity in one area, they begin noticing confusion in others. Once someone experiences honesty, they begin recognizing dishonesty more easily. Once someone experiences alignment, they begin feeling misalignment more strongly. Type "I am worthy of authentic love" in the comments, not as a wish, as a truth you are choosing to accept right now. And your heart needs this right now, because that is exactly what started happening. Connections they once accepted without question started feeling different. Conversations they once enjoyed started feeling empty. Dynamics they once tolerated started feeling exhausting. And listen to this. At first they resisted those feelings. They wanted things to remain simple. They wanted everything to stay familiar. They wanted to avoid difficult questions, But difficult questions have a way of appearing when truth enters someone's life. And your heart needs this right now, because every realization about you seemed to create another realization about themselves. Why had they ignored their intuition for so long? Why had they settled for less than authenticity? Why had they convinced themselves that genuine people were so difficult to find? And, listen to this. Those questions stayed with them day after day, moment after moment, quietly growing stronger. And the more they thought about them, the more they realized that discovering the truth about you was changing far more than their opinion. It was changing their perspective, their standards, their expectations, their understanding of what they truly wanted. And your heart needs this right now, because that kind of change rarely happens without emotion. In fact, it often brings powerful emotions to the surface. Relief, hope, gratitude, regret, excitement, fear. All of them appearing at once, because growth is emotional. Realizations are emotional. Truth is emotional when it changes the direction of someone's life. And listen to this. There were moments when they found themselves wondering why you affected them so deeply, why learning the truth about your character mattered so much, why they could not simply move on and forget about it. And eventually they found the answer. It was not because you were perfect. It was not because you were idealized. It was not because you fit some fantasy. It was because you felt real. And in a world filled with uncertainty, reality has a power that is difficult to describe. And your heart needs this right now, because that reality was beginning to influence every decision they made, every reflection they had, every question they asked themselves. The person who started this journey was not the same person who was standing there now. Their awareness had expanded. Their understanding had deepened. Their perspective had shifted. And listen to this. They may not have realized it yet, but they were approaching a turning point, a moment where these realizations would stop being thoughts and start becoming actions. A moment where what they discovered about you would force them to make choices they never expected to make. Because once someone sees the truth clearly enough, they cannot continue living exactly as they did before. And your heart needs this right now, because that turning point was getting closer every day. The truth was becoming stronger. The doubts were becoming weaker, the clarity was becoming undeniable, and the discovery they made about you was beginning to change everything. Type "This is me" in the comments if you have lived this exact situation. Your story matters, and someone else needs to know they are not alone in this. Do not skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because what started as a simple realization was now becoming something much bigger. It was no longer just a thought they could push aside. It was no longer something they could distract themselves from whenever it appeared in their mind. Save this video right now, not for later. For the moment when you need to hear this again, because that moment will come. And listen to this. The truth they discovered about you had reached a point where it was beginning to influence the way they looked at everything around them. Every conversation, every connection, every relationship, every choice. And your heart needs this right now, because when someone encounters something genuinely authentic, they begin measuring everything else against that experience without even realizing it. And listen to this. At first, they tried to ignore what was happening. They tried to convince themselves that nothing had changed. They told themselves they were imagining things. They told themselves they were making too much of a simple realization. But every time they attempted to move on, the same feeling returned, the same questions appeared, the same understanding resurfaced. And your heart needs this right now, because truth has a way of returning until it is acknowledged. It does not disappear simply because someone wishes it would. It waits. It lingers. It grows stronger with time. And listen to this. There was someone in their life who had become part of their routine. Someone whose presence felt familiar. Someone they had kept around, because familiarity often feels safe. And your heart needs this right now, because familiarity can sometimes disguise itself as connection. People stay in situations because they know them. People remain attached to things because they are comfortable. People convince themselves that comfort is enough because questioning it feels difficult. And for a long time, that is exactly what happened. They stayed comfortable. They stayed familiar. They stayed where things felt predictable. But something inside them was changing. And listen to this. Every new realization about you seemed to highlight something they had been avoiding elsewhere. Every example of your authenticity made them notice a lack of authenticity somewhere else. Every moment that reflected your honesty made them aware of situations that felt less honest. And your heart needs this right now. The connection felt different, and they could no longer explain those feelings away. Send this to someone whose heart needs this right now. No explanation needed, just send it. They will know why. And listen to this. They may have spent many nights reflecting on what was happening, thinking, questioning, replaying situations in their mind, trying to understand why everything suddenly felt so different. And your heart needs this right now because deep down they already knew the answer. They just were not ready to face it yet, because facing it meant accepting that something in their life was no longer aligned with who they were becoming. And that realization was uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable, because growth often is. And listen to this. They were not looking for reasons to leave. They were not searching for problems. In fact, part of them desperately wanted everything to remain the same, because change requires courage. Change creates uncertainty. Change forces people to step away from what is known and move toward what is true. And your heart needs this right now, because that is exactly the crossroads they found themselves standing at. One path led back to comfort. The other path led toward honesty. One path felt familiar, the other path felt authentic, and the more they reflected, the harder it became to ignore which path was calling them. They were standing at a crossroads, and something in them already knew which path was the right one, even before they were ready to admit it. If reading that just landed somewhere inside you, you might be standing at one too. The link in the pinned comment and in the description is open. Whether you give a coffee, plant a seed, or choose to become a part of this community, what moves through that link is not lost. It finds its way back to you, in clarity when you need it, in courage when the familiar path feels easier, in the quiet knowing that choosing what is true always costs something and always returns something greater. You are not funding a message. You are investing in the part of you that is finally done settling for what only feels safe. And listen to this. Every day the emotional contrast became stronger. They started noticing how certain conversations left them feeling drained instead of fulfilled. They started noticing how certain interactions felt forced rather than natural. They started noticing how often they were compromising their own feelings simply to maintain something that no longer felt right. And your heart needs this right now, because once someone begins noticing those things, it becomes impossible to stop noticing them. What was once invisible becomes obvious. What was once tolerated becomes difficult. What was once accepted becomes questioned. And listen to this. The person they were connected to may not have done anything dramatic. There may not have been betrayal. There may not have been conflict. There may not have been a single event that clearly explained what was happening. Sometimes relationships do not end because something terrible happens. Sometimes they end because clarity arrives. Sometimes they end because people grow. Sometimes they end because one person finally admits what their heart has known all along. And your heart needs this right now, because that is where your soulmate found themselves. They were no longer trying to determine whether something felt right. They were trying to determine how much longer they could ignore the fact that it did not. And listen to this. That question followed them everywhere. It appeared during quiet moments. It appeared during ordinary days. It appeared when they were alone with their thoughts. And every time it appeared, the answer became a little clearer, a little stronger, a little harder to deny. Something had changed. Something had shifted. Something was no longer aligned. And listen to this. As that understanding grew, another realization appeared alongside it. The truth they discovered about you was not creating confusion. It was creating clarity. Every time they thought about your authenticity, they felt certain. Every time they reflected on your character, they felt clarity. Every time they remembered what they had learned about you, they felt alignment. And your heart needs this right now, because certainty and confusion rarely exist in the same place. One connection felt heavier. The other realization felt lighter. One situation created questions. The other created understanding. And that contrast became impossible to ignore. And listen to this. Eventually, they reached a point where they could no longer pretend everything was fine. They could no longer convince themselves that familiarity was enough. They could no longer ignore the growing distance between what they were experiencing and what they truly wanted. And your heart needs this right now, because that moment marked a turning point. A moment where reflection began turning into decision. A moment where awareness began turning into action. Because once someone sees the truth clearly enough, they cannot remain the same person they were before. Once someone recognizes what authenticity feels like, they stop settling for what feels artificial. Once someone understands what alignment feels like, they stop pretending misalignment is acceptable. And your soulmate was reaching that exact point. The doubts were fading. The excuses were fading. The confusion was fading. And in their place, something much stronger was emerging. Clarity, truth, and the realization that everything was about to change. Type Amen in the comments if your heart recognized everything that was just described. Let that be your agreement with what is already moving. Do not skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now. Because after all the reflection, after all the questions, after all the nights spent trying to understand what was changing inside them, your soulmate finally reached a moment they could no longer avoid. And listen to this. It was not a dramatic moment. It was not loud. It was not filled with anger, arguments, or chaos. In fact, from the outside, it may have looked completely ordinary. But inside them, something significant was happening. Because your heart needs this right now, there comes a point where a person can no longer ignore what they know to be true. There comes a point where pretending becomes more exhausting than honesty. There comes a point where holding on to something that no longer aligns with your heart feels heavier than letting it go. And listen to this, your soulmate had reached that point. For weeks, maybe even longer, they had been trying to understand their feelings. They had been trying to figure out why everything suddenly felt different, why certain conversations left them feeling empty, why certain interactions felt forced, why a connection they once accepted without question no longer felt the same. And your heart needs this right now, because every answer seemed to lead back to the same realization. The more they learned about you, the more difficult it became to ignore what was missing elsewhere. Not because they were comparing people in a superficial way, not because they were trying to replace one connection with another, but because authenticity has a way of exposing everything that lacks authenticity. And listen to this. They started noticing patterns they once overlooked, patterns that had always been there, but never seemed important until now. The way certain people only showed up when it benefited them. The way certain conversations never went deeper than the surface. The way some relationships depended more on habit than genuine understanding. And your heart needs this right now, because awareness changes everything. Once you see something clearly, you cannot force yourself to become blind to it again. The signs were everywhere. The feelings were everywhere. The truth was everywhere. And yet they still hesitated, because letting go is never easy, even when it is necessary. And listen to this. Part of them wanted to stay where things were familiar. Part of them wanted to avoid the discomfort that comes with change. Part of them wanted to believe things could somehow return to the way they used to feel. And your heart needs this right now because human beings naturally hold on to what they know, even when their heart is quietly telling them it is time to move forward. And listen to this. There were moments when they questioned themselves, moments when they wondered if they were being unfair, moments when they wondered if they were overthinking everything. But every time those doubts appeared, something stronger appeared beside them. Clarity. The same clarity that had been growing ever since they discovered the truth about you. The same clarity that kept showing them what was real. The same clarity that refused to disappear. And your heart needs this right now because clarity is patient. It does not need to argue. It does not need to force itself into someone's awareness. It simply remains present until it can no longer be ignored, and eventually they stopped ignoring it. And listen to this. The decision did not happen all at once. It happened through acceptance. Acceptance that something had changed. Acceptance that they were no longer the same person they were before. Acceptance that a relationship built on familiarity alone was no longer enough. And your heart needs this right now because once acceptance arrives, action becomes possible. They stopped making excuses. They stopped rationalizing. They stopped convincing themselves that everything was fine, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to be completely honest. And listen to this. Honesty can be uncomfortable. It can force people to confront truths they have avoided for a long time. It can require difficult conversations, difficult decisions, difficult endings. But your heart needs this right now because honesty also creates freedom. Freedom from pretending, freedom from confusion, freedom from carrying emotional weight that no longer belongs in your life. And that freedom was exactly what they were beginning to experience, not immediately, not perfectly, but gradually, with every step they took toward truth. And listen to this. When the moment finally arrived, they made the choice they had been moving toward for a long time. They cut someone off, not out of anger, not out of resentment, not out of revenge, but out of alignment, out of self-respect, out of a growing understanding that holding on to something simply because it was familiar was no longer enough. And your heart needs this right now because that decision surprised even them. Not because they did not know it was necessary, but because they never imagined they would actually have the courage to follow through. Yet they did. And once it was done, something unexpected happened. Silence, not loneliness, not emptiness. Silence, the kind of silence that appears after a storm, finally passes. The kind of silence that allows someone to hear their own heart clearly again. Type "I choose alignment" in the comments right now. Not because someone told you to, because something in you already made that choice before you even finished reading this. And listen to this. In that silence, they began reflecting on everything that had happened. Everything they learned, everything they felt, everything they finally understood. And your heart needs this right now because the more they reflected, the clearer one truth became. The person they cut off was not the center of this story. The ending was not the center of this story. The conflict was not the center of this story. The center of this story was the realization that changed everything. The realization that discovering your authenticity had forced them to examine their entire life. And listen to this. As they sat with that understanding, they began recognizing how much they had grown, how much they had changed, how much stronger they had become simply by choosing truth over comfort. And your heart needs this right now because growth often looks exactly like this. It looks like letting go of what no longer aligns. It looks like making difficult decisions. It looks like trusting yourself enough to follow your own clarity. And that is exactly what they had done. They chose honesty. They chose alignment. They chose truth. They chose honesty. They chose alignment. They chose truth. And in doing so, they did not just change one relationship. They changed the standard by which they would accept everything that came after. If this story moved something in you, if some part of you recognized yourself in every step of this journey, know that what you plant in a moment like this does not disappear. Through the link in the pinned comment and in the description, whether it is a coffee, a seed, or becoming a part of this community, what you give here is a declaration to yourself that you are no longer waiting for permission to want something real, that you believe what is authentic is already on its way to you. Every seed sown from a place of genuine alignment carries that alignment back into your life, not as a reward, as a reflection of what you have already decided to become. And while they may not know exactly what comes next, one thing has become impossible for them to deny. The truth they discovered about you changed far more than their opinion. It changed their perspective. It changed their standards. It changed the choices they were willing to make. And now, standing on the other side of that decision, they are beginning to realize that the moment they discovered who you truly are was the moment everything else started changing too. Hit the like button as a seal on everything this message placed inside you. And if you have been seeing number sequences lately, drop them below one more time. 111, 444, 777. 1111. Let the universe see that you are paying attention.